Let's talk about political parties. In this chapter, we're going to talk about the American political party system. Then we are going to dive into the evolution of the party system in Texas. Then we'll talk about party organization, and then we will talk about what political parties do in American and Texas politics. So in the United States, we seem to only be able to sustain two parties. Competition in our country has been between two parties really kind of from the beginning. George Washington warned against basically taking lanes, picking a group, but it was done very early. We started out with people that supported strong central government. Those people were called Federalists, and people that thought that central government needed to give more power to states, or that people needed to have more power. Those people were called anti-federalists. Eventually, the Federalists went away, and anti-federalists turned into Democratic Republicans. And so Democrats are the longest serving or the longest existing party in the United States. They eventually dropped the Republicans part and continued to call themselves Democrats. And then the other party went through several iterations. They were the Whig Party, and then they became the Republican Party in the early 1830s. Abraham Lincoln was a Whig and then a Republican. And it has stayed that much it has stayed Democrats and Republicans since the middle of the 19th century. So that is true in the United States. That is also true in the state of Texas. There are some things that are pretty common in political parties, and so let's talk about what those are. In general, political parties are pragmatic, meaning that they really think that ideas should be judged on the basis of their practical results. So they are, we used to always hear about President Obama being very pragmatic. So we're not necessarily going with what we purely believe. We're going with what is actually going to work. What can we actually get achieved? And so sometimes that just means that parties end up doing a lot of compromising. You will hear when you look at party platforms, if they have one, you will see that there are lots of valence issues. These are things that everybody agrees with. We believe in a free society. We believe in clean air. We believe in peace. We believe in prosperity. Who's going to say that they don't believe in prosperity? Who's going to say that they don't want peace? And so a lot of times you will see political parties saying those things in general, but you will, and especially in recent times, also see parties dig in on position issues. This is how I feel about this. I know everybody doesn't feel this way, but I feel so strongly about it, I have to support it. And usually it is those position issues where you find the differences in the parties. We are these days seeing growing polarization. Now, there on the screen, it has a question mark. I think that it is probably time to put an exclamation mark behind that. we are, especially in an election year, just, it amazes me how people dig in, and won't let you say something negative about the candidate that they support. And even when it is clear that that probably was a mistake, they're still, well, that's my guy, that's my lady, and will dig in. Another thing that is more common of parties, although I would argue that while Barack Obama was the president, that there was probably a little bit less decentralization and in the Democratic Party. And I think right now the Republican Party is seeing less decentralization, where they separate from the national party. They separate issues. They talk about different things, um, and they raise their own money, and really concentrate on local issues. And I think we are not seeing very much of that from the Republican Party. The Republican Party this year at their national convention didn't even come up with a platform. There's just whatever President Trump says, that's what we believe. And I would argue that Democrats were kind of like that. No, we had a platform. Democrats did have a platform. I said we hit. Democrats did have a platform, but the party was very personality driven. And I think we're seeing that phenomenon right now with the Republican Party. So let's just turn to how things progressed in Texas. It is certainly different than on the national stage. We in Texas have had a tendency to have one dominant party. And that has been pretty consistent really since our inception. Now, we have ideological factions in Texas and in America. Conservatives are those people we talked about in chapter 1 that don't like things to happen too quickly. They are wanting to maintain the status quo. They socially don't want a lot of change, or not really big proponents of moral issues like same-sex marriage, abortion, and then there are the fiscal conservatives that are not that worried about social issues, but they're worried about the government asking for them for too much money, spending too much money, so that they have to ask them for money. Where liberals have a tendency to like change, to support civil rights, to support a woman's right to choose, to support LGBTQ issues. In general, liberals have a tendency to like a bigger tent, more diversity, and fiscally liberals have a tendency not to be very conservative, because they feel like this is the people's money. We need to spend people's money on them. So, although I guess we just have to note that it is not only under Democrats that the deficit rises. It's just what liberals have a tendency to want to spend money on. Liberals are much more likely to support government programs that give back to community members, where Republicans, or conservatives, we'll say it that way, are much more likely to support government programs that help to grow the economy, or are spending money on defense. So this is a picture of our Texas state senator. We have two that go to Washington, D.C. on our behalf. Ted Cruz won a hotly contested race in 2018 against the Democratic candidate Beto O'Rourke. He is considered to be very conservative, and he came up in a movement that was called the Tea Party movement, and T stands for taxed enough already. That was a group of people that were very fiscally conservative. They did not like Democrats or Republicans because they felt like politicians in general spent too much money. And they ended up making their way into the Republican Party. As they started to run candidates, you would see Democrat Republican T on a lot of ballots in local elections and state elections. The Republican Party goes to Tea Party activists and leaders, and they said, listen, the Republican Party has a lot more power, and you are going to be much more likely to have your issues heard if you come into this under this Republican Party tent. We don't like spending money. We don't like big government. So really, if you want to be more effective and to see policies that you like put in place, you need to come over here to the Republican Party where we have the money and the power. And Tea Party activists did. Ted Cruz is Tea Party. Marco Rubio from Florida is Tea Party. Michelle Bachmann, where's Michelle Bachmann from? Maine? I think Maine. Maybe not. I don't know. She was a presidential candidate a few years back. So in Texas, we still have a tendency to be pretty heavy on the conservative side. But we have to go back. Don't ever lose that history side of Texas. Remember that Democrats were the first party in the state. And Democrats really dominated when Texas seceded. The people that were in power at the time were Democrats. When Texas and the Union ended up losing the war, we had Republican control, a lot of it because of policies. And remember that E.J. Davis was a Republican. African Americans were Republicans. And those Democrats were just the opposite. So the Democratic Party had this big split where the Southern Democrats were pro-slavery and Northern Democrats really were not pro-slavery and eventually moved over to the Republican Party. But once the United States government ended its commitment to Reconstruction, about 1877, when Rutherford B. Hayes was elected, Texas was dominantly Democrat. If you were conservative in Texas, you were a Democrat. If you were moderate in Texas, you were a Democrat. If you were African American or liberal, maybe you were a Republican, but you weren't getting elected to anything. So some of the liberals were Democrats too. Democratic candidates dominated on all levels, local and state levels in Texas. But Texas has had this conservative tradition in the state. So most of the people in power were conservative Democrats. That sounds crazy to us now, but really those people that were at that convention in 1876, those were conservative Democrats. The Grange, conservative Democrats. And that was the way that Texas, the parties in Texas evolved. So all the fighting in the Democratic Party, let's just say it like this. The Democratic Party had lots of fights because you had conservatives coming out, you had liberals coming out, you had moderates coming out, and all of them wanted control of the Democratic Party. Now, there were some little small smatterings of Republicans getting elected. Republicans were primarily in West Texas. Republicans were moderate to liberal. In 1960, we had a special election, and this was because our senator that went to the United States from Texas was Lyndon Baines Johnson. Lyndon Baines Johnson had just been elected as the Vice President of the United States, so he could no longer serve in the Senate. But he got Texas to let him run for the Senate, even though he was also the vice presidential candidate. That's a special kind of power right there. So when John F. Kennedy won, we had to have a special election. If you recall, a special election is one where everybody just puts their name on the ballot. Doesn't matter if you're Democrat, Republican, Green Party, Libertarian. There's sometimes 20 names on the ballot. And they just fight it out. You have to win by a majority. And so usually there's lots of runoff elections. In that year, the primary Democratic candidate people thought was too conservative. The Democratic Party was fighting, and so a lot of Democrats didn't go vote, or they voted for John Tower, the Republican candidate. So all of a sudden in 1961, Texas, a dominantly Democratic state, had a Republican senator. So now we had a Democratic senator from Texas in the United States and a Republican senator. It kind of happened on a fluke, but he was there. Something similar happened in 1978. It was another big fight in the Democratic Party, and Bill Clements ended up coming out of the fray with Democrats fighting each other as a Republican governor. Now, he was a Republican governor with the Democratic majority in the House and Senate. He was not very effective. He got into lots of fights. They did not listen to him. He did his state of the state address, and they were like, yeah, whatever. He would veto bills. They would override his veto. Bill Clements was not a super effective Republican governor, but he was a governor, Republican governor in Texas nonetheless, in a sea of Democrats. But then this started to happen. The Democratic Party, led by Lyndon Baines Johnson, started to champion civil rights issues. So under Lyndon Johnson in 1964, Congress passed the Civil Rights Act. In 65, Congress passed the Voting Rights Act. In 68, Congress passed the Fair Housing Act. Now, there were huge fights. I've been listening to this book about John Lewis and how he went to the Democratic Convention in 1964 and tried to get an African American delegation seated for Mississippi at the Democratic Convention, and they were eventually turned away. There were huge fights as African Americans started turning to the Democratic Party, and a lot of conservative Democrats did not like it. Those Southern Democrats were segregationists. They were the people that were turning the dogs on marchers. They were the people that were having people run fire hoses on marchers. Democrats were those same people that helped pass the 1876 Constitution. They were racist, they were segregationists, and they were very uncomfortable with this new influx of African Americans. So the Democratic Party widened the tent, but there were people that were not happy about it. There was a guy named Strom Thurmond. Where's Strom Thurmond from? South Carolina, Alabama, Georgia, one of those. He left the Democratic Party and ran as a Dixiecrat, a pro-segregationist. And so Democratic Party was experiencing a lot of fighting. Now, back in Texas, everybody was still a Democrat. And African Americans were starting to come to those conventions. They were eyeing it all very suspiciously. Now, there were some in the Democratic Party that were like, hey, this is great. The liberals in the Democratic Party, come on. Ann Richards was like, this is beautiful. Y'all come on. The representative from my hometown was a guy named Dan Kubiak. Dan Kubiak loved the fact that African Americans were moving over to the Democratic Party. He's like, as far as I'm concerned, that's more voters. He would enlist my mom, who is African American, to go and register voters. He would go to churches. He would go to people's houses. He would ask what people needed. He recommended my brother for West Point, and my brother actually got in to West Point. And you only have two people from each state get accepted to West Point each year. So some in the Democratic Party were ecstatic, but most in the Democratic Party, those conservatives were not. And so they started to take issue with what was going on with the National Party. And so they started to vote for Republicans on the national level. They were crazy about Richard Nixon, who won in 1968. Lyndon Johnson decided not to run. And then even earlier than that, the Democrats in Texas really liked Eisenhower. Dwight Eisenhower was a Republican. They were not super excited about this huge tax and spending program that Franklin Delano Roosevelt had. So they were starting to take issue with the people that were being elected on the national level. So Eisenhower they liked, Nixon they liked, Ronald Reagan they loved. George H.W. Bush they loved. And then we got a Republican governor in the 1994 election, and that guy's name was George W. Bush. He beat out Ann Richards, my heart and soul. I love Ann Richards. Beat Ann Richards in 1994. He was super, super popular. And in with him came more and more Republicans. In 1992, right before that election, we had another special election, and Kay Bailey Hutchison became our second senator. So we had one seat, John Tower, and then the other seat, and then eventually John Cornyn got that seat. and then Kay Bailey Hutchison, another Republican. So we had two Republican Texas senators Texas senators in the United States Congress. After George W. Bush got elected in 1998, that was when it was super clear that Texas had switched. Republicans won every statewide election. And right now, Republicans hold every statewide position. If it's not a small district, if it's being elected by the entire state, then Republicans hold those spots. This is a flyer from John Tower's 1961 special election campaign. And you will notice that he is talking about states' rights, not spending too much, national security, reducing the national debt. So he is talking about fiscally conservative issues, talking about hiring someone that's experienced for the or electing or appointing someone that is experienced for the Supreme Court. There were all kinds of things that were going on, and many of the issues hit home. So let's do a comparison. Let's just look at the way things have progressed. We'll start with 1973. In 1973, there were 132 Republicans in the House of Representatives, Democrats in the House of Representatives, and only 17 Republicans. Let that sink in. In the Senate, there were 28 Democrats, 3 Republicans. In the House of Representatives, 20 Democrats, 4 Republicans. These days, it is completely reversed. The closest Democrats came to to some type of equity was in 2008, when a lot of Democrats turned out to vote in the Barack Obama years. But even then, it was like 46 Republicans and 44. Or 96 and 94. There we go. So say it right. I'm going to get it right in a minute. 76 and 74. 150. There's 150 members of the Texas House of Representatives. Today, we are heavily Republican. Now, there are lots of predictions that Democrats may actually be able to take over the Texas House. We will see. I know that this is one of those change elections, and so we should expect a lot more people to come out and vote. And a lot of the people that traditionally vote Democrat are incentivized to go and vote right now. And so who knows what's going to happen for the 2021 year. The election is November 3rd. Early voting starts October 13th. So let's talk about how we got there, how we made the switch to the Republican Party in the state of Texas. Let's make sure that we understand the terminology. Number one, party realignment. Now, I described to you people little by little leaving the Democratic Party for one reason or another. Most of it because they did not like the civil rights agenda, and they were really starting to like the more conservative members of the Republican Party that were running for office. Eisenhower, Nixon, Reagan, H.W. Bush, George W. Bush. Um, and so little by little, people were leaving. That is called party realignment. That is when somebody leaves one party and completely switches to another party. This actually happens periodically. Um, we usually see
there's no active workout in progress.
We actually see party realignment about every 30 or 40 years for various issues, usually having something to do with race, or war and how people feel about war. People switch parties. Sometimes it is because of policies. A lot of people went to the Democratic Party when Roosevelt was in place because Roosevelt was about jobs and money. And Eleanor Roosevelt was a huge advocate for minority rights and civil rights. And so some of those African Americans started to move over to the Democratic Party in the 30s and 40s. The rest of them came over because of the civil rights issues in the late 60s. But realignment happens when you have this transition where one party was dominant and people moved to another party. We also are seeing this rise in partisan identification. And that just means that people say, I am a Democrat or I am a Republican. So this just means that people are attached, identify with, and vote for people that are in one party. But we have seen growing de-alignment in our state. De-alignment is where people leave all the parties. They are independent. They vote for the person that makes the most sense to them if they vote at all. And we have seen almost a third of people in Texas and about that much in the United States that have given up on party identification and say that they are independent. And so that has made political parties lose some of their power, because there were people that would vote for Republican candidates no matter who they were. You didn't even have to work hard. And now, if there are people that are independent, then you're going to have to convince them that you are the best candidate. Can no longer just simply say, well, I'm a Republican, so vote for me. Where do Republicans see strong support in our state? Well, in the Houston suburbs. Up until 2018 in Fort Worth, all of our leaders, now local leaders don't have party identification, but like the mayor of Fort Worth, Betsy Price, she used to be the county clerk, and she's a Republican, and Fort Worth has been reliably Republican for years. The largest urban area, I believe, in the United States that consistently votes Republican. But 2018, Beto O'Rourke won Tarrant County. I don't know. West Texas, north of Interstate 10, reliably Republican. Reliably Republican. Okay. I don't know. Me and Siri. East Texas, still and probably will be reliably Republican. And the hill country, Edwards Plateau, so we're talking what they call German hill country, west of San Antonio. Now, that's an area that's probably been Republican for a while. Where do Republicans struggle? In South Central Texas. So anywhere San Antonio and going on south, in the Corpus Christi area, McAllen area, Cameron County, Starr County, Hidalgo County, any of those counties in the valley, Republicans struggle. In major metropolitan areas, Austin, Dallas, Houston, San Antonio, El Paso, they don't have on here. Well, it's there. It's there on the next one. Those large cities that have large concentrations of African Americans and Hispanics, Democrats tend to do well and Republicans struggle. In the border region, from the Rio Grande Valley to El Paso, you will see a lot of blue. Some of these areas are sparsely populated, but El Paso is not. And some of those cities are not sparsely populated. Again, we are kind of at this crossroads right now. And so we really believe that Texas is in the middle of a party realignment. So we will see. We'll see how things pan out. If we look at voters, percentage of voters that indicated their party identification. Look at 1952, 66% identified as Democrats. 2018, 31% identified as Democrats. But in 1952, only 6% identified as Republicans. Look at 2018, where it is much, much closer. And there's a large percentage of people that don't identify as Democrat or Republican. So this chart bears out what we were saying, that there are more independents, and Republicans still dominate, but we are in a period of transition. Just want to bring this back to your mind. This is the 2016 presidential election. The major candidates were Donald Trump, Republican, Hillary Clinton, Democrat, and look at the counties where the Democrat won. Dallas County, Travis County, Bexar County, El Paso County. These people with like 6 people in West Texas, and then down in the valley, Hidalgo County, Cameron County. I can't read them all, so I just say the ones I know. Starr County is somewhere here, Zapata. Then there's Harris County and Fort Bend, which was a little bit of a surprise, because it is a suburb. It is a suburb, but Fort Bend County went to the Democratic candidate in 2016. In the 2018 elections, add to this, Tarrant County was blue and Jefferson County was blue. Go figure. So within the Republican Party, conservatives and moderates have a tendency to be Republicans. Now, we talked a little bit about pragmatism, and I want to bring this home for you guys. I had you in your discussion board look at the different party platforms. And what you're going to find is that there are many contributors in the Republican Party platform and the Democratic Party platform. You can see factions. You can see different groups that contributed to that party platform. Within the Republican Party platform, you will see Tea Party. You will see libertarians that don't like big business, don't like too much spending. You will see veterans' rights. You will see NRA and Second Amendment gun ownership, and you will see conservatives in general. So you'll see stuff in the Republican platform that'll be like, we believe in a marriage between one man and one woman, and the absolute right to protection of life from birth to death. And so you can see that those preachers, those evangelical preachers, got in there and were able to influence what went into that platform. No doubt. So, again, this was written a little while ago. The question is, can Democrats still compete? Or can they compete at all? And the answer is eventually yes. This year, we don't know. We will see. Now, I told you that African Americans have a tendency to vote with the Democratic Party. In Texas, it's about 95% of African Americans identify with the Democratic Party. Latinos are lower. It's about 60%. So it's a large amount, although Latinos have low voting numbers, but they are increasing in population in Texas. So let's look at this map and just look at concentration of Latinos in Texas. There are high concentrations, more than half, in the Panhandle, in far west Texas, and along the border, in South Texas and the middle southern area. There are really high concentrations in South and West Texas and the Panhandle. Notice Harris County. The concentration in Harris County is from 40 to 49.9%. So that amount is going up. Notice that East Texas is much more likely to have white, which is 0 to 9%. Or the tan, which is 10 to 19%, 19.9. I have a friend that is from East Texas, and when she first started teaching in college, she got a job in Houston. So she is teaching at a community college in Houston, and she picks up this list of a lot of people with Hispanic surnames, with Spanish surnames, because we know Spain came in and donated all their names to Mexico and to Central and South America. So she's looking at this list, and it was full of names that she had never seen. She's from East Texas. So she's like, Juan, she's just calling out names, and she goes, oh, Jesus, which was Jesus, because she'd never seen him before. That tickled the heck out of me. Now that is foreign to me. I'm from Central Texas. And so let's see. Travis County is somewhere over here. Milam County is somewhere here. And so it is in the 20%, 20 to 29% range. Is that going to make a huge difference with 60%, 60% voting or identifying with the Democratic Party? It may. It may. I will tell you this, that many a dissertation within the ranks of political scientists have been written on Hispanic voting, Latino voting. How are they going to vote? How do you attract? How do you increase voter turnout? Because at some point with the population growing, it's definitely the largest minority group in the United States, and nearly it's 40%, more than 40% of the population in the state of Texas. So it matters what issues are important. Now, some of the power is taken away, even with those kinds of numbers, because Hispanics in Texas traditionally have lower voting rates. But at some point in 2018, we saw an uptick in the amount of Latinos that voted in Texas. And so it is making everybody stand up and take notice. Because in the end, all a politician is concerned about is, what do I have to do to get reelected? What do I have to do or say to get people to vote for me? And so once they figure out who's voting, then they figure out what issues are important to them, and that is the way that they start leaning. All right, finally, we're going to talk about party organization, and I'm going to go through this pretty quickly. This is, let me tell you this, the same for Democrats and Republicans. We have 3 levels of organization within the state of Texas. Precinct level is several precincts within each county precinct. Then you have the county level, which is, or sometimes there are districts instead of the whole county being a in the area. It is a part of a county. So large areas will have districts where it's not just one, it's not the whole county, it's a part of the county. Harris County has district conventions, senatorial district conventions. In Tarrant County, we have a county convention. Republicans have a county convention, and Democrats have a county convention. Then each party has a state convention. And so that is the way that work gets conducted on the local level. At precinct conventions, and we skipped precinct conventions this year, they went directly to county. They elected, at each of these conventions, they decide who's going to be the county chairperson. They are responsible for running elections, and they decide what platform or ideas they want to push up to the state level, and who are going to be the delegates to the state convention. Then at the state convention in the summer, every other year, they decide on a platform, decide who the delegates are going to be to the national convention. They decide on the officers to the national convention. to the state convention and the delegates to the national convention. So it is actually pretty consistent. Any level of party organization is going to have this consistently. You are in charge of the area that you are elected for, and you don't get paid any money. So you have a precinct chair, you have a county chair that is elected at the county convention, and you have a state chair that's elected at the state convention. There's also an executive committee at the state convention. There are delegates for the state convention, and these people spend countless hours doing work, but none of the positions pay. So most of the time, the people that are working at these levels are retired or independently wealthy. Now, that if we continue to have things virtually, that may change. That may change. Because if people are not having to use all their time traveling and money traveling, then it may bring in some new blood on the Democratic and Republican levels. A political party is basically an organization that puts people in office. So who makes up political parties? One are the people that decide I'm a Democrat or I'm a Republican. In Texas, that literally is just a decision. You don't have to register. But those people that identify with the parties and are going to elect people that are in that party no matter what. Then you have the formal party workers, the chairman, the executive board members, the committee members, the delegates. Those are the people that are formally working within the party to make things run, make sure that voting is certified and sent to the Secretary of State. They're actually doing the work. And then you have the elected officials. And elected officials run in partisan elections. They identify with one party or another, and they are actually doing the work. They often form coalitions, work together, have caucuses where they decide this is what we're working on this year. This is who we want to do this. They get people appointed. And so they are actually rolling up their sleeves and doing the work. This map is 2020. It's a 2020 copyright, and it is just showing which states have unified Republican control, which states have unified Democratic control. Not very many on the West Coast: Washington, Oregon, California. On the East Coast, Rhode Island, Connecticut, New Jersey, Delaware, and which have divided control, where they have some have Democratic houses or Democratic senators or Democratic governors, with Republicans in the other chambers. So Louisiana, Montana, Maine show divided control. Be very curious to see this map later.